carcasses plunged into a darkness that seemed to have weight, Abram heard God describe the future of his descendants. 400 years of slavery in a foreign land. 400 years. God did not hide the price. Before sealing the promise, he made clear the suffering that would come with it. And then it happened. In total darkness, between the halves of the dead animals, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between the pieces. Genesis 15:17. This was not a campfire. It was not a natural phenomenon. It was the visible presence of God passing through the corridor of blood. To understand what this meant, you need to understand the ritual. In the ancient world, when two kings made a covenant, both walked between the split animals. The meaning was explicit. If I break this pact, may what happened to these animals happen to me. It was a death oath. Both parties committed themselves equally, under penalty of being torn apart like those carcasses. But in this covenant, only God passed between the pieces. Abram was sleeping. He did not walk. He did not swear. He did not commit to anything. God took upon himself all the responsibility of the pact, both ends of the covenant. If the promise fails, if the offspring does not come, if the land is not delivered, if the blessing does not reach all nations, the Creator of the universe was saying, "Let me be torn apart." It is the divine equivalent of signing a contract where only one party can be punished, and that party is God. Now think about what just happened. A childless man married to a sterile woman, sleeping in a field soaked with animal blood, has just received the most unilateral covenant in history, a covenant that does not depend on him, that cannot be broken by his failure, that is sustained exclusively by the word and honor of God himself. This is why theologians call this an unconditional covenant. Abram did not need to do anything to keep it valid. It was already sealed. In blood, in fire, in darkness, and this covenant will haunt human history like a shadow that does not disappear, crossing empires, exiles, holocausts, and resurgences that defy all historical logic. But if God had promised everything, the sun, the land, the nation, why had the most natural thing in the world still not happened? Why did Sarai remain unable to get pregnant? The years passed. The promise grew older, and Sarai's patience was reaching its limit. What she did next will plant a seed of conflict that 4,000 years later is still shedding blood in the Middle East. Sarai was 85 years old when her patience ran out. 10 years living in Canaan, 10 years since the original promise, 10 years waking up every month with the same hope and sleeping every night with the same disappointment. And she made a decision that, in our modern eyes, seems absurd, but in the ancient world was perfectly legal, documented in clay contracts that archaeologists found in Nutsi, Mesopotamia. Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant, it may be that I shall obtain children by her. Genesis 16:2. Hagar, the young Egyptian woman, the one I told you to remember. Sarai gave her to Abram as a sort of Middle Bronze Age surrogate mother. And before you judge, understand that this was not betrayal. It was not immorality. It was not a deviation. It was legal protocol. The Nutsi contracts dating from the 2nd millennium BC describe exactly this practice. If the primary wife was sterile, she should provide a servant to the husband, and the child born would be legally considered the wife's child. The servant gestated, the mistress raised, the heir was legitimate. Everything within the rules, but legal rules do not control the human heart. And what happened next proves that the sharpest pain does not come from enemies, it comes from within one's own house. Hagar became pregnant, and the moment that belly began to grow, the entire dynamic of the tent changed. The text is brutal in its honesty. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. Genesis 16:4. Hagar looked at Sarai with something every woman recognizes, That silent contempt that needs no words. Every time Hagar touched her belly, every time she smiled in a specific way, every time she walked a little slower, displaying the weight she carried. It was a soundless message. I can do what you cannot, and Sarai broke down. May the wrong done to me be on you, she shouted at Abram. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between me and you. Genesis 16:5. The man who had faced 4 kings, who had refused the fortune of Sodom, who had received visions from God Most High. This man looked at the war between 2 women in his own tent and did the most cowardly thing possible. He washed his hands. Behold, your servant is in your power. Do to her as you please. Genesis 16:6. And what Sarai did was so harsh that Hagar fled. Pregnant, alone, without water, without food, without a destination. An Egyptian slave in the middle of the Negev desert, walking toward Egypt like a wounded animal trying to go back home. And here something happens that most people do not notice, and that was revolutionary for the time. God went after Hagar, not Abram, not Sarai. Hagar, a slave, a foreigner, a woman without rights, without a family name, without a tribe to protect her. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness on the way to Shur. And the first thing he said was, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? Genesis 16:8. He called her by name. In the ancient world, slaves did not have names, they had functions. But God knew her name, and the instruction that followed was very hard. Go back to Sarai. Submit yourself. But along with the instruction came a promise that no slave in the ancient world ever received. I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. Genesis 16:10. The same language used with Abram, the same words, countless offspring, for a runaway Egyptian slave in the desert, and more. Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. Ishmael, in Hebrew, Yishmael. It literally means God hears. The boy's name would be a permanent reminder that God hears the cry of a slave. And Hagar did something that no other biblical character did before her. She gave a name to God. You are a God of seeing, she said, El Roi, the God who sees. Genesis 16:13, a slave named the Creator. And the well where this happened was named Bir Lahai Roi, the well of the living one who sees me. And that well existed. Archaeologists and biblical geographers locate it between Kadesh and Bered in northern Sinai. A real place marked forever by the moment God saw a woman no one else saw. Hagar returned. She submitted, and she gave birth to Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old. Finally he had a son, an heir, a boy who would grow up running among the flocks, learning to shoot with a bow, becoming what the text later describes as a wild donkey of a man, free, indomitable, living in conflict with everyone around him. Islamic tradition considers Ishmael the direct ancestor of Muhammad and the Arabs. Jewish tradition recognizes that he was the first son, but not the son of the promise. And in this fracture, in this distinction between the son who came from the human plan and the son who would come from the divine plan, a rivalry was born that has crossed millennia and continues to bleed. And then silence, 13 years of absolute silence. From Genesis 16 to Genesis 17, 13 years pass in a single turn of the page. No visions, no voice, no angels. Abram lived 13 years raising Ishmael, probably convinced that the boy was the fulfilled promise. 13 years believing that Sarai's plan had worked, that God had used Hagar to fulfill his word. 13 years of normalcy, of routine, of a shepherd's life. And on the first day of the 14th year, when Abram was 99 years old, God appeared. And what he said demolished everything Abram thought he knew. I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. that I may make my covenant between me and you, and may multiply you greatly. Genesis 17, 1-2. Abram fell on his face. And God continued speaking, adding layer upon layer to the original promise. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. Genesis 17:5. Abram meant exalted father. Abraham means father of multitudes. Imagine walking through the camp with that name for 13 years without a legitimate son. Every time someone called Abraham, it was a public reminder of the promise and the apparent failure. It was like giving a bankrupt man the nickname millionaire and making him answer to it every day. And it didn't stop there. Sarai also got a new name, Sarah. From my princess to princess, without the possessive, without belonging to just one man, princess of nations. And God said the words that made Abraham laugh, literally laugh, with his face pressed to the ground. Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. Genesis 17:19. Abraham was 99 years old, Sarah was 90, and his reaction was to guffaw. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said to himself, Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? Genesis 17:17. It was not a laugh of faith, it was a laugh of absurdity, of incredulity, the father of multitudes lying on the ground laughing at God's promise. And the first thing that came out of his mouth after the laughter was an attempt at negotiation. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Genesis 17:18. Translating, God, forget this impossible plan. I already have Ishmael. He is 13 years old. He is strong. He is healthy. Bless him and let's stop here. But God did not accept the substitute. Ishmael would be blessed, 12 princes, a great nation. But the covenant, the eternal promise, the lineage that would change the world, that would pass through Isaac, through the son who did not yet exist, through the impossible son. But before the son came the sign, and the sign was not pretty. Circumcision. Every male in Abraham's house, himself, Ishmael, every servant, every slave, should be circumcised. A cut in the flesh that would forever mark the difference between the children of the covenant and the rest of the world. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised. Ishmael was 13, and on that very day every man in the camp was circumcised. Think of the logistics of that. Hundreds of men, all wounded at the same time, all incapacitated at the same time. The entire camp vulnerable, without a single warrior in condition to fight. It was an act of faith as extreme as anything Abraham had ever done. If any enemy attacked at that moment, it would be a massacre. But no one attacked, and while the camp recovered, the heat of Mamre intensified like an oven, and something was coming that no one expected. Genesis 18 opens with a domestic scene that hides an earthquake. And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. It was noon. The vertical sun of the desert made every stone a brazier. Abraham was sitting in the shade of the tent entrance, probably dozing, when he lifted his eyes and saw 3 men standing before him. His reaction was immediate and disproportionate. He ran to meet them. He bowed with his face to the ground. He offered water to wash their feet, shade to rest, and a morsel of bread, which actually turned into an absurdly elaborate meal. Abraham ran to Sarah and told her to prepare 3 measures of fine flour, about 20 kilograms of bread. Then he ran to the herd, took a fat calf, and told a servant to prepare it. Butter, milk, roasted meat, fresh bread. For 3 strangers in the middle of the desert. Hospitality in the ancient world was sacred law. But this went further. Abraham, 99 years old, recently circumcised, running back and forth under a 40-degree sun to serve strangers. It was as if he knew or felt that these were no ordinary travelers. And they weren't. While they ate, and the text says they ate, which generated centuries of theological debate about whether angels can eat. One of them asked, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" The fact that he knew her name was already revealing. And then came the promise, for the third time, but now with a set date. "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Genesis 18:10. Sarah was listening behind the tent curtain, and she laughed. Just as Abraham had laughed weeks before, Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" Genesis 18:12. And the visitor, whom the text now explicitly identifies as the Lord, turned to Abraham and asked the question that defines the limits between the human and the divine. Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Genesis 18:13-14. Sarah lied. "I did not laugh," she said, afraid. And the answer was short, like a thunderclap. "No, but you did laugh." 3 words. He knew. He always knows. After the meal, the visitors got up and looked towards Sodom. And the Lord did something extraordinary. He thought out loud, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do?" Genesis 18:17. It was as if God were deliberating with himself whether or not he should reveal his plans to the patriarch. And he decided to tell him. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah was great. Their sin was very grave. And God would go down to see if what he had heard corresponded to reality. Destruction was coming. The 2 angels went on to Sodom. But Abraham stood before the Lord, and what happened next is the most audacious negotiation in sacred history. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Abraham started at 50. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? And God granted it. Then 45, granted, 40, granted, 30, 20, until reaching 10. For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. Genesis 18:32. Abraham stopped at 10. He didn't ask for 5. He didn't ask for 1. Perhaps because he believed that in the city where Lot lived with his family, there would surely be at least 10 decent people. He was wrong. The 2 angels arrived in Sodom at evening. Lot was sitting at the city gate, exactly the position of a respectable citizen, a judge, or an elder. The man who years before had pitched his tents as far as Sodom was now part of the establishment. And when he saw the 2 strangers, he insisted they stay at his house, not out of courtesy, out of desperation. He knew what happened to strangers in that city after the sun went down. And before they lay down, the house was surrounded. The men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, surrounded the house. Genesis 19:4. It was not a group, it was the entire city, every neighborhood, every age group. And what they shouted leaves little room for metaphorical interpretation. "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." The Hebrew verb yada, to know, has explicit sexual connotations in this context. And Lot, in a gesture that horrifies modern readers, offered his 2 virgin daughters in place of the guests. The mob's response was worse than the original threat. "Stand back. This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." The angels pulled Lot inside and struck the crowd with blindness, and in the forced darkness of those eyes, the men of Sodom continued groping the door, trying to find the entrance. Blindness did not stop them. The compulsion was greater than the pain. When morning dawned, the angels grabbed Lot by the hand. Literally, the text says they seized his hand, the hand of his wife, and the hands of his 2 daughters, and dragged them out of the city, the Lord being merciful to him. Genesis 19:16. Lot did not leave of his own free will. He was dragged. Mercy came in the form of brute force, and the instruction was direct. Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. Do not look back. This command seems simple, But when the sulfur began to fall, when the sky turned orange and then red and then black, when the ground shook and the air filled with a roar that sounded like the world tearing in half, Lot's wife looked. The text does not explain what she was looking at, the house where she lived, the friends she left behind, the life she knew. Perhaps she was looking at everything at the same time. And she turned into a pillar of salt. She didn't die. She didn't fall. She was transformed. A white statue on the edge of the desert, frozen forever in the act of looking back. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, claimed that the pillar still existed in his time. Medieval travelers claimed to have seen it. To this day, near the Dead Sea, human-shaped salt formations attract pilgrims who swear they are standing before Lot's wife. And Sodom burned. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Genesis 19:24. The plain that Lot had chosen for being beautiful like Eden turned into the lowest point on the earth's surface, the Dead Sea, 430 meters below sea level, with salinity so high that no fish survives. The most fertile land in the Middle East became the most sterile place on the planet. Geologists found layers of ash and crystallized sulfur along the southwestern shore of the Dead Sea. Spheres of pure sulfur of 98% purity embedded in limestone formations, a degree of purity that does not occur naturally anywhere else on Earth. Something happened there. Something catastrophic, localized and absolute. Whether it was fire from heaven, a natural gas eruption, or a meteor shower that hit underground sulfur deposits, science debates. But that the destruction was real, geology confirms. Abraham woke up that morning and looked towards Sodom. And he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. Genesis 19:28. The man who had negotiated with God for 10 righteous people discovered there were not even 10. The entire plain was gone, and Lot, the nephew who had chosen with his eyes, lost everything: his wife, his house, his fortune, his dignity. He survived 2 daughters and nothing more, hidden in a cave in the mountains, drunk and destroyed. What happened in that cave is one of the most disturbing passages in Genesis. And from it were born the Moabites and the Ammonites, 2 peoples who would torment Israel for centuries. But that is another story. The smoke of Sodom had not yet dissipated when the impossible promise began to move. Sarah became pregnant at 90 years old. The text offers no medical explanation. It does not rationalize. It does not soften. It simply declares, "The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him." Genesis 21:1-2. At the appointed time, not at Abraham's time, not at Sarah's time, at God's time. 25 years after the original promise, 25 years of waiting, of doubt, of failed human attempts, of inexplicable divine silences. And the boy's name? Isaac, Yitzhak in Hebrew. It means he laughs, because Abraham laughed when God promised. Sarah laughed when she heard behind the curtain. And now Sarah said, "God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me." Genesis 21:6. The laughter that had been of incredulity turned into laughter of joy. What was a joke turned into a miracle. The boy's name was living proof that God has a sense of humor, and that the last laugh is always his. But joy brought blood. When Isaac was weaned, around age 3, as was the custom, Abraham threw a great feast, and Sarah saw Ishmael laughing. The Hebrew verb used is metzachek, from the same root as Isaac, the one who laughs. Ishmael was laughing, mocking, playing, imitating. The text does not specify, and generations of scholars have debated the exact tone of that laughter. But for Sarah it was enough. "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." and Abraham felt the weight of it in his chest. Ishmael was his son, his firstborn. 14 years of memories, the first smile, the first steps, the first arrows. But God confirmed, "Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you." And on a morning the text describes with an economy of words that hurts, Abraham rose early in the morning, took bread and a skin of water, put it on Hagar's shoulder, gave her the boy, and sent her away. Bread and water. For the desert. For his own son. And then came the test. The test that defines Abraham. The test that defines faith. The test that 4,000 years later still makes theologians, philosophers, and fathers lose sleep. After these things God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." Genesis 22:1, 2 words in Hebrew, hineni, here I am, present, available, ready. And then God said the most terrible thing a father can hear, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering." Notice the construction. God did not simply say, "Sacrifice Isaac." He piled on layers of pain. Your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac. Each word a scalpel, each comma a deeper blade. And Abraham's reaction? The same as when he expelled Ishmael. So Abraham rose early in the morning. No dialogue, no protest, no negotiation. The man who had haggled with God for 10 righteous people in Sodom did not say a single word for his own son. He saddled the donkey. He split the wood. He took 2 servants and Isaac, and he walked for 3 days. 3 days knowing what he was going to do. 3 days looking at the boy who carried the wood on his back without knowing it was the wood for his own pyre. 3 days of silence. The text records not a single word during the journey. On the 3rd day, Abraham saw the place from afar. He said to the servants, "Stay here. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. We will come again," plural. He said, "We will come again," both of them. Was it a lie? Was it faith? Was it an irrational hope that God would find a way out? Hebrews suggests that Abraham believed God could raise Isaac from the dead. If it's true, it was a faith without precedent, because no one had ever been resurrected before. He was inventing theology on the way to the sacrifice. And then Isaac asked, the question that breaks the heart of any father who has ever read this text, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" And Abraham replied with the most weight-bearing sentence in all the Bible, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." Genesis 22:8. God will provide. In Hebrew, Yahweh Yireh. And he built the altar, he arranged the wood, he bound Isaac, and the boy did not resist. There is no record of a struggle, a cry, or an escape. Isaac was old enough to carry wood up a mountain. Rabbis estimate between 25 and 37 years old. He was not a helpless child. He was an adult man who let himself be bound. The son's obedience mirrored the father's obedience. And Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife. The angel shouted from heaven at the last second, "Abraham, Abraham!" And for the second time, "Hineni, here I am. Do not lay your hand on the boy. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And when Abraham lifted his eyes, he saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket, the lamb that God would provide. And on that mountain, Abraham carved a name into the sacred map of humanity, Yahweh Yireh. On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided, Mount Moriah. The same mountain where 1,000 years later Solomon would build the temple. The same mountain where 2,000 years later the Romans would destroy it. The same site where today stands the Dome of the Rock, one of the most disputed spots on the face of the earth. The place where a father almost sacrificed his son became the spiritual epicenter of 3 religions and the geopolitical pivot of the modern world. Sarah died at the age of 127 in Hebron, and Abraham wept. The patriarch who had faced pharaohs, defeated kings, negotiated with God, and raised the knife over his own son, wept. And then he did something that seems mundane, but was revolutionary. He bought land. He negotiated with Ephron the Hittite, paid 400 shekels of silver, an exorbitant price, probably inflated because the seller knew Abraham had no alternative, and acquired the cave of Machpelah. The first legal property of the people of Israel in the Promised Land was not conquered by the sword. It was bought, with a deed, with witnesses, with counted money, and that cave exists. In Hebron, the Ibrahimi Mosque, or the Tomb of the Patriarchs, marks the spot where tradition states that Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah are buried. It is one of the oldest places of continuous worship on the planet, and one of the most guarded, divided between a synagogue and a mosque, watched over by armed soldiers. Abraham died at the age of 175, and the text records a detail that almost goes unnoticed. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him. Genesis 25:9. The two of them together. The son of the promise and the son of the slave woman, the heir of the covenant and the exile of the desert, side by side, burying their father. At that funeral, for a brief moment, the fracture healed. And perhaps that is the final lesson of Abraham, not perfect faith, because he lied, doubted, tried to solve everything alone, and almost destroyed the people he loved in the process. Not flawless obedience because he delayed, questioned, laughed at the promise, and offered substitutes. The lesson is that God does not expect ready-made people. He chooses broken people and walks with them until the promise matures, not in their time, but in his. Abraham is called the father of all nations, not because he was perfect, but because, despite everything, he kept walking. Every time he fell, he got up. Every time he erred, he returned. Every time God's silence seemed eternal, he pitched his tent and stayed. And 4,000 years later, half the population of the planet, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, still invokes his name. A shepherd without land, without a son, without a visible future, who left without knowing where he was going, and changed the history of humanity forever. If you've made it this far, click on the next video appearing on your screen. It was made especially for those who watched this one until the end.